Good evening. It's a Tuesday. It's September. The kids are back in school, and Sharia Crime Stoppers webinar series is back in action. I think you know we're part of the United West. Let me introduce our co-host, Mary. Good evening, Mary.
Hello, everybody.
And our guest tonight, Clare Lopez. Clare will give you a formal introduction in just a minute. We're so happy that you're with us, Clare.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you too.
All right. Well, we also want to thank all the people that have joined us tonight. There is a rush of new people, and we're very grateful for that. United West is, we're a part of that. The United West, pardon me. The theme is one team, one fight. And you know what? We're going to prepare this one team, which we include you in. The fight we're going to focus on for this particular fall season is the 2020 fight. We're going to work together with our guests to prepare all of us, the one team, for the one fight, the 2020 fight. We're using the word fight as opposed to election, and we'll let you think about that. Tonight, we're introducing our fall series of webinars. They come every Tuesday night. They're always at 7 o'clock Eastern time. You've registered, that's why you're here. You don't need to do anything else. The webinars will continue every Tuesday for 11 weeks until the 19th. That'll be before Thanksgiving. So you're all set, and you'll get your reminders. If you're new and you've registered for any one of these, you'll get information about all of them. Tonight, we do have Clare Lopez. Clare, we'll invite you to give your background in just a minute. I think most people know that you've got an extensive background in intelligence and projects. We'll invite you to talk about that. Before we do that, we want to mention people that we are going to talk about two topics tonight. We are going to talk about the coming anarchy. That's the body of our presentation. But tomorrow is 9/11. And you remember 9/11. And you remember that picture on the right that we never get to see anymore. Well, Clare Lopez has done extensive work on exposing the people accountable for this. And we really thought it was very appropriate. We're going to show you an 8-minute video that Clare prepared just recently, and then we'll go into the other topic. Please take a look at this video and think about the deeper meaning in what Clare is teaching us. And then we'll have some Q&A and we'll move on to the other topic.
Hello, this is Clare Lopez and the Truth Report, brought to you by American Truth Project. As the grim date of September 11 approaches once again, and we pay tribute to the heroes of that day, as well as the thousands of innocent lives lost, harmed, and changed forever, it is also time to hold accountable those who are responsible for that atrocity. For even as we pause to remember, United States envoys are engaged in discussion about withdrawing from Afghanistan with some of the very perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks, who are now putting forth their demands at talks in Doha, Qatar. I'm talking about senior leadership of the Taliban, including Hirqullah Saeed Wali Khairkhawa, who was the governor of the Afghan province of Herat pre-9/11 and was captured and sent to Guantanamo Bay afterward. Later, to be among the 5 Taliban jihadis exchanged for the release of the traitor Bo Bergdahl. Herat is the westernmost province of Afghanistan and borders on Iran. Part of this governor's responsibilities in the months leading up to the 9/11 attacks was to help organize joint operational planning meetings among Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and Iran. Yes, Iran. The jihadist Iranian regime in Tehran, and especially the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, its Quds Force unit, and the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, or MOIS, the Iranian Intelligence Service, were all deeply involved in the conception of the 9/11 attacks, the recruitment and training of the hijackers, and the provision of safe haven to Osama bin Laden, many of his fighters, and their families after they and the Taliban were driven from power in Afghanistan in late 2001. Many who are watching here today probably do not know that it was the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini who first conceived of the idea to attack the United States using passenger airplanes. He called it Shaitan Dar Atash, or Satan in the Flames. But Khomeini died before his evil plot could be realized. It was his successor, the current supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who actually supervised the development of plans that led to the 9/11 attacks. First came the formal alliance among the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, and Al-Qaeda that took place in the early 1990s under the Muslim Brotherhood regime of Omar al-Bashir, the recently ousted ruler of Sudan. The 9/11 Commission report refers to these meetings and describes how the Al-Qaeda leadership, including Osama bin Laden, had found safe haven in Sudan after Saudi Arabia turned him away from returning home after the end of the 1980s war in Afghanistan against the Soviet Red Army. In Khartoum, Osama bin Laden complimented the Iranian president, who was also there, Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, on the devastating use of suicide truck bombs by the Iranian Shiite terror proxy Hezbollah in 1983 attacks against the U.S. and French embassies, French forces, and the U.S. Marine Corps barracks in Beirut. So in response to bin Laden's request, Rafsanjani tasked Imad Mughniya, his top Hezbollah terror chief, to train al-Qaeda operatives in how to conduct suicide bombings against large building structures. Mughniya set up training camps in Sudan, Lebanon, and Iran and went to work. The horrific result of that Sunni-Shiite jihad collaboration was not long in coming. Khobar Towers, 1996, East Africa embassy bombings in Dar es Salaam and Nairobi in 1998, the USS Cole attack in October 2000, and yes, ultimately 9/11 itself. We read in the 9/11 Commission report how a, quote, senior Hezbollah operative, unquote, not only, quote, visited Saudi Arabia to coordinate activities there, unquote, but subsequently accompanied some of the Saudi muscle hijackers on flights around the Middle East, including in and out of Beirut, Lebanon, and Iran, during their preparation and training for 9/11. That senior Hezbollah operative was Imad Mughniya, and what he did in Saudi Arabia in October 2000 was recruit the Saudi muscle hijackers. Yes, of course the Saudis knew he was in country and what he was doing there. How did those hijackers fly all over the Middle East, you may wonder, and still have clean Saudi passports in which to get U.S. visas prior to entering the United States for the attacks? Well, I was an expert witness in the Havlish legal case, which concluded in late December 2011 with a ruling from Judge George Daniels, Southern District of New York, that Iran and Hezbollah were co-responsible with Al-Qaeda for the 9/11 attacks. One of the other witnesses in that case was Janice Kephart, who had been a member of the 9/11 Commission staff. Her affidavit for the Havlish case explained how the Iranian and Saudi regimes had agreed to place some kind of mark in the passports of the Saudi hijackers that would be recognized by the Iranian border guards so they would know not to stamp their passports coming in and out of Iran. The website for the Havlish case is www.iran911case.com. All of the affidavits of the expert witnesses, including hers, are listed there. I also wrote an affidavit for the case, together with friend and colleague Dr. Bruce Teft. It's number 6 in the list at the website. In it, we documented with open source references the history of the Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and Iran jihad terror relationship. And yet, as of this date, 18 years after the attacks of 9/11, and aside from what's in the 9/11 Commission report and what our own Havlish case documents, no one has yet held the Iranian regime officially accountable for what it did to us on that awful day. Worse yet, in the aftermath of 9/11, the George W. Bush administration reached an agreement with the leaders of Al-Qaeda, Iran, and Saudi Arabia to keep Osama bin Laden, his family members, and dozens of top fighters in safe haven inside Iran, guarded, protected by the IRGC, Quds Force, and MOIS. It wasn't until late 2010 that bin Laden moved to Abbottabad, Pakistan, where he was finally taken out by American Special Operations Forces the following May 2011. Neither has that agreement ever been made public to the American people. It is long since past time that this Iranian regime and its Shiite terror proxies in Hezbollah be held fully accountable for their role in the attacks of 9/11. How about it, Mr. President? Thank you for watching. Please share this video, and please go to americantruthproject.org and sign up for free for more educational material like this. ATP never charges for our content. We have made it super easy to sign up at www.findberry.com. It just takes a minute and you will never miss an exciting mailing. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. What a great preparation and delivery of that information. As always, Claire, you're always so careful to document everything and refer to content and the ability for people to do their homework. Tell us a little bit more about these affidavits. Maybe our audience doesn't understand exactly what an affidavit is, what bearing it has on a case. So tell us about your affidavit, or where does that fit in the legal process?
Sure. So this legal case, the Havlish case, is so named after one of the widows of a pilot from the 9/11 attacks. And other widows and others, family surviving members from 9/11 joined in this legal case back in 2004. And they didn't have confidence that the United States government would get to the bottom of 9/11, the attacks, and what had happened to their loved ones. So they came to what eventually grew to be a consortium of, I think it was 8 legal firms, and asked them to investigate 9/11. I did not join the case until 2009, but others had joined earlier. People like author and investigative reporter Ken Timmerman, for example, on the case from the very beginning in 2004. Other experts, Patrick Clausen from the Washington Institute, as we mentioned, Janice Kephart, former 9/11 Commission staff member, and many others. A list of, I forget exactly how many, up in the teens, wrote affidavits. An affidavit is a statement in the area of that person's expertise. And we had, like I said, quite a number of them for the Havlish case. The one that I co-authored with Bruce Teft, as I said, was a compilation of the history of the Al-Qaeda, Iran, Hezbollah relationship, which, as we've just said, goes back to the very early 1990s, when they formally came together. Yes, Sunni and Shiite came together, and they made a pact to go after what Osama bin Laden would call the Crusaders and Israel and the Jews, when he issued his 2 declarations of war. One came in 1996, one in 1998. But it was in the early 1990s that this collaboration was getting formed. And so that's what my affidavit was about, with Bruce Teft, collaboration on that affidavit together, and many other affidavits in the list. Janice's was about the passports and the arrangement, to keep the passports clean, as it were, so that the hijackers eventually, they got valid visas in their passports, in their Saudi passports, and that's how they got into the United States.
So we talk about the American justice system, stopping crime. In this case, is there a conclusion to the case? Is this a situation where somebody makes a decision on the merits of the
Yes.
lawsuit?
Right. So I mentioned Judge George Daniels, I believe, who still sits on the court. It is a federal district court, Southern District of New York, located in Manhattan. And he was the judge that took our case, that handled our case. We submitted this entire package of many affidavits and covering statements in May of 2011 to him. And he took about 6 or so months, 7 months. And I think it was actually December, maybe 15, 2011, if I remember the date correctly, he issued his ruling. And that is when he ruled from the bench, which is something extraordinary, ruled from the bench that we had proven our case that Iran and Hezbollah were indeed co-responsible with Al-Qaeda for the attacks of 9/11. Now, I know that people will mention, well, what about Saudi Arabia? Yeah, absolutely. They were part of it, as we mentioned, with the passport case, and of course the recruitment of the Saudi muscle hijackers, from on Saudi territory by the senior Hezbollah operative Imad Mughniya. But our case, just as it was, did focus on Iran and Hezbollah. So it's not that we are dismissing Saudi Arabia, it's just that the focus of the Havlish case was Iran and Hezbollah.
So in this case, a private citizen or group of citizens had to hire or work with a group of attorneys to take this forward. What is the role of the federal government to investigate its own, to investigate things? I mean, other than producing reports, why don't we see indictments coming out of the executive branch, the Justice Department, on this or other cases we could mention? What's the problem there? Why wouldn't there be?
The 9/11 Commission was established by Congress, funded by Congress, and given a certain set period of time in which to complete its investigation. There were other investigations. Of course, Congress itself issued finally a report, a joint statement about 9/11 and the attacks of 9/11. So there were multiple investigations, obviously, and a lot of what came out of the investigations had to do with the reorganization, remember, of our executive branch. This is where we got the Department of Homeland Security from. This is where, as they called the silos that kept information from being shared between and among agencies like the FBI and the CIA, were at least somewhat changed so that information would be shared better. So many changes came out of that. The Patriot Act came out of Congress. There were many results. In the case of the Havlish case and with Judge George Daniels, with that guilty ruling by the judge, later, some months later, a massive financial penalty was levied by the judge against Iran, but against the Iranian regime that remains still in power to this day. But there's very little chance of recovering that from this regime for any of the survivors.
So the benefit, I mean, obviously there could be people who could have gone to jail in this or other cases. The benefit of
going to jail, I mean, you're talking about foreigners. You're talking about Saudi nationals. You're talking about Iranian nationals. You're talking about Hezbollah Lebanese nationals out of reach of any except a drone, I suppose. Right.
Well, maybe we need to get those. I guess what I'm thinking of in broader terms about the other cases where there are people who are American citizens who are involved in Sharia-related crime. We just don't seem to be able to get indictments. Real quick, because we want to go on the other topic, I want to just mention, you've done a superb job investigating other things like at Benghazi. And of course, we know that Ocean 17 is another terrible situation where it's been very difficult to get down to the truth, and only family members, people we know, for example, the Vaughns and others, their efforts. It took private citizens' efforts to move the ball forward. What is the problem in Washington with the intelligence committees, the Attorney General, et cetera, where we just never seem to be able to get down to this? We still don't have definitive answers on Benghazi. We certainly don't have definitive answers on Exclusion 17. What's the problem?
Well, the system defends itself, doesn't it? Some would call it the counter state that is still operational throughout the United States government, in all of our agencies and organizations, certainly throughout the executive branch. There are many who would be found wanting for their response to these events. Certainly with regard to Benghazi, you mentioned. People who are still in office in one capacity or another. They defend themselves and they defend their own and their colleagues.
So I think it's really important for people to keep pressure on for indictments in all of the cases, the kind of cases we talk about, whether it's God forbid, an honor killing or something as serious if we could ever get an indictment on sedition. We just don't seem to be able to impact in a sufficient way to reestablish an increasing law and order. We seem to be going the other way. Your affidavit, your research, of course, helped enlighten all of us. So if you get into court, you get depositions, truth comes out under oath. So that's a very positive thing. And as we celebrate 9/11, or remember, not celebrate 9/11, thank you for that video. That was very, very.
Thank you, and thanks to Annie Cyrus for the invitation to make it, and for the chance to air it on her platform online, which is www.americantruthproject.org.
And I've seen it shown everywhere, Claire. So it is getting put out there in numerous places.
Good.
You mentioned the clean Saudi passports that these fellows had that came in and attacked us. How many clean passports do you think there still are out there? Are we any better today now that Homeland Security is in effect from what we had then?
Well, it's hard to know, looking at things from the outside, not from the inside of government. I think the major failing in overall U.S. intelligence in the years leading up to 9/11, if I could name anything, it was the failure to realize that once the Soviet Union had collapsed and the Soviet Union had come apart and split into, you know, its multiple constituent republics. Communism seemed to be defeated. Of course, it wasn't. But that's the way it was interpreted. We'd won the Cold War, right?
Yeah.
But at that point then, we're talking about the early 90s, there was a failure to understand that that was not the only threat, and that there were others out there. And because nobody had studied Islam, jihad, Sharia since I don't know when, there was not a recognition, for example, at the time of what was going on in Khartoum with these meetings among what would become, it was just forming at that point, Al-Qaeda, and of course the forces, the leadership of Iran and the top operatives of Hezbollah. There wasn't the recognition, in part because people then and to this day even still refused to accept that Sunnis and Shiites could ever work together. And so even when this was happening in front of their eyes, it seems that it was somehow dismissed, overlooked, passed by. And so that deadly alliance, you know, continued, developed, and as I enumerated through all these different attacks, Khobar Towers, Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, the USS Cole in 2000, and eventually 9/11 itself, it wasn't understood, for example, what Al-Qaeda was. Here's another example. So Osama bin Laden, as I mentioned, put out 2 declarations of war, one in 1996, one in 1998. Why did he do that? He did that because it's obligatory within Islamic doctrine to give the intended target, the non-Muslim, the infidel, the opportunity to respond to the invitation to Islam. And why? Because that's what Muhammad did. That's how Muhammad did it. So that's what Osama bin Laden did. That's what Osama bin Laden did. Now, people mistakenly call these things fatwas. They weren't fatwas. Fatwas is an answer to a question of Islamic doctrine that's provided by a qualified Islamic cleric. Well, that's not bin Laden. He was viewed at the time, this is the 90s, middle, late 90s, as a financier and nothing really but a wealthy Saudi whose money was going to support, they were allowed to use the word jihad causes. They could actually use those words at that time. But that his money was simply funding those causes. They didn't understand, for example, what the word Al-Qaeda means, which is the base. The base of what? The base of the Islamic movement. And the Islamic movement is worldwide, and it is Sunni, and it is Shiite, and they work together. Even simultaneously as they may be tearing each other happily apart on battlefields in different places. At the macro level of Dar al-Islam versus Dar al-Harb, they absolutely did, are, will be working together. Well, this was all missed by our intelligence community. And I think that was the greatest failure. They did not then, and they still do not now know what Islam, jihad, and Sharia are about. And if anything, I would actually say we're in worse shape right now than on September 10, 2001.
Wow.
Because now we've been through what we call the Great Purge, some of us, and that basically means the actual removal of all training, teaching, curricula,
True.
PowerPoints, presentations, and the instructors, the knowledgeable instructors, John Guandolo, Steve Coughlin, Robert Spencer, Bill Warner, Bill Gothrop, that went with those presentations, all out.
Yep.
And not restored, not returned yet. Great Purge, not reversed yet, even under this current Trump administration.
So is it fair to say, Claire, I think it's important as we wake up tomorrow morning on 9/11 that violence, we're going to talk about that at length, but an attack could occur and could again be attributed to this lack of awareness, this lack of this either willful or whatever blindness that exists. And by the way, I don't think there's anybody in our audience who doesn't know who you are, but when we have to answer that question, you might want to give a little background about why you know all the things you know and give a little background. This is not just a personal. Clare Lopez, why don't you?
Well,
yeah.
I'll go back to graduate school, Syracuse University, International Relations, Maxwell School at Syracuse. When I finished my master's, I did not have an offer letter in my hands, although resumes were out all over the place. And so off I went to Marine Corps Officer Candidate School at Quantico, Virginia. While I was there, in the next some weeks, the letter that I was really waiting for arrived, and that was from the CIA, to which I had applied many months before. Off I went on a 20-year career focused on Russia with the agency. I was already in the private sector after a 20-year career on 9/11. And I was working as a contractor at that time, actually in the Bureau of Diplomatic Security at the State Department, as it happened. And that meant that I was right downtown here in Washington, D.C. on 9/11. The response that I saw, not only from my own department that I was working in, but the overall government and others, sort of left me discouraged. And I thought, I've got to do my own study. Nobody's going to help me with this. They don't know what in the world they're doing. And so I began a course of my own study. And thank goodness for Amazon books, which are sold used and free shipping, because that helps a lot. And then I also made acquaintances and had the great good fortune to meet people along the way, like John Guandolo and Steve Coughlin, and many others who helped me to learn what this was that hit us on 9/11. And it was a long process, basically because I was doing it by myself. But eventually I met up with the great team here at the Center for Security Policy. I wrote a paper for them in 2009 that was called the Iran Lobby, and it was about the gaggle network of Tehran agents of influence, really, that I saw at that time, late 2008, early 2009, coming in on the coattails of the soon-to-be Obama administration, advocating for pro-Tehran positions. After that, I became a fellow with the center for a while. I've been the vice president for research and analysis here since 2014. So that's a little bit about my background, and my focus on Iran really began after, quite some time after 9/11. I had begun the study of just Islam more broadly, but then I focused on Iran in about the middle of the 2000s, when I became acquainted with the largest, oldest, I think the best organized and most determined of all the Iranian opposition groups, the Mujahideen cult, and their parent political organization, umbrella organization called the National Council of Resistance of Iran. You've been wondering where all this information about the Iranian nuclear weapons program and all of these secret sites are, where that information is coming from, that somehow finds its way to the Mossad and the Israeli government. MEK. In any case, that was my focus on Iran and has been a particular focus ever since. So in a nutshell, I guess that's my background.
I just want to remind everyone that there is a Q&A button at the bottom, and we're going to continue on the next topic, but we will take questions at the end. So please write down your questions, hit the Q&A button, and then we'll get to those questions at the end. One last connection to Iran and 9/11. I think it's important maybe for you to just give us an update on your analysis of Iran's presence within the United States in terms of operatives in the government, in states. Do we have Hezbollah cells in America?
Sure. So in terms of the Iranian regime itself, I think its presence in the United States is most obvious and most detrimental in terms of front groups and agents of influence is what I would call them. A prime example that is most often spoken of is NIAC, the American Islamic, oh geez, NAIC, NIAC, NIAC, come on, Iranian American Council, in any case founded by previously Trita Parsi, although he stepped back from that role now, but that organization has been extremely active in pushing and supporting the cause, the positions of the Tehran regime. And it was also active, its senior officials like Trita Parsi were active during the time of the nuclear negotiations between the United States government, or I should say among the U.S. government, the P5, +1, and Iran. They were very much present in the different negotiation sites like Geneva and Vienna, Lausanne, Switzerland. And so the network that surrounds an organization like that, National Iranian American Council, I'll get it. The network of individuals, former government officials, think tankers, that they have journalists, writers, that they have surrounded themselves with, and that help to promote what obviously is the point of view, the perspective of the Iranian regime in Tehran. So that's what I would call the most obvious influence of Iran's regime in the United States. As far as Hezbollah goes, that's a little different. And people probably know that Iran prefers, likes most, to operate through proxy organizations. Hezbollah was its very first, established in southern Lebanon among the Shiite population there in the early 1980s. Hezbollah now has a presence all over the world, at least in 80 countries or more. Here in the United States, absolutely. It hides its cells among communities of Lebanese Shiites, places around Detroit, Michigan, Dearborn, Michigan. Some of the suburbs of Chicago might be examples. Some of these cells are involved in criminality, in particular narco trafficking in collaboration with the Mexican drug cartels and other kinds of criminality like contraband and other kinds of scams and frauds and such. And so that is very even more worrisome in terms of the cell presence of Hezbollah. Some of the cells also are here pretty much just kind of lying low, but in the meantime conducting what we would call pre-attack casing and surveillance And as a matter of fact, within the last couple of years, some have been caught, actually, Iranian agents, Hezbollah agents, doing just that, conducting pre-attack casing and surveillance on American targets, Israeli targets, meaning diplomatic facilities and personnel, and also the Iranian opposition, conducting attack surveillance against the MEK. So that is what Hezbollah is doing here in the United States.
Claire, we know that Trump has challenged Iran for the last few years in terms of their nuclear program. Where do you see them playing a part in the 2020 elections? Do you think they're here and will be doing anything to disrupt and get us into trouble with the elections?
No, not in a physical way, but you know where the Iranians are, have been, and will be very active is in cyberspace. Folks might or might not have ever heard of a U.S. cybersecurity firm called Cylance, C-Y-L-A-N-C-E. Cylance had been tracking Iranian cyber activity back 2012, 13, 14 time frame, and by the time of late 2014 had become so alarmed at what they had found the Iranians doing that they published a report that you can find online under the name Operation Cleaver, as in meat cleaver.
Yeah.
Operation Cleaver by Cylance, November 2014. And that report documents at that time, now that's 5 years ago, that Iran already, through cyber intrusions, had found a way inside of most, if not all, of our critical infrastructure, meaning water, electricity, telecommunications, banking, finance, emergency services, water, dams, on and on. Now, hopefully steps have been taken in the wake of that report being published and other awareness, hopefully, that's been raised. But I would expect to see the Iranian influence in cyberspace to be very active and far more active than any actual on the street or violent kind of activity. And here's why. It's not just on the Shiite side of things. Because the subversive element of the Islamic movement's offensive against the United States has been so overwhelmingly successful, the influence operations, information operations, subversion, in other words, going so swimmingly, they don't want to mess that up. Because after 9/11, recall, there was an enormous clampdown across the board, not just over there, in Afghanistan or the mountains between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and rounding up Al-Qaeda members and Taliban and so forth. It was here inside the United States that there was a tightening across the board to the point of people being concerned about civil liberties, right? They don't want that to happen again. So they would rather keep things quiet, which is not to say, that, now here's the word, extremists. What's an extremist in Islam? One that goes too far, too fast for the circumstances at the time. Extremists, as some did call Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, are still going to try to conduct those kinds of attacks that we saw in, the Boston Marathon bombing, the San Bernardino attack at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. Those kinds of attacks will always be attempted by the extremists in the definition within Islam. But the broader Islamic movement would really rather keep things tamped down now because things are going so well. They don't want to mess it up.
Wow.
And their friends on the left are enabling them to keep the smooth movement and saturation going. Maybe we should segue into the other topic, which is we're talking about one team, one fight. The fight we're talking about the next 400 or so days is the 2020 fight. And Claire, we'd like you to begin to share with us your own views with your background about what you mean by the coming anarchy.
Okay, I'm going to be glancing down at some notes that I've got here in front of me, but I put these notes together because I see coming, maybe even before next year, but certainly next year, as the election season gears up again, I see coming a repetition and perhaps worse anarchy on the streets than what we saw in 2016. And if folks will remember back then, in particular, as President Trump, now then candidate Trump, began to gain in support and backing, and huge numbers were coming out to hear him speak at different campaign stops. As that moved along, so did the violence, if folks remember. And in many places, events were disrupted. Security had to haul people out of the halls, that sort of thing. You might remember the roadblock that was thrown up with cars across the road in Maricopa County, Arizona. Thankfully, at that time, Sheriff Joe was still sheriff in Maricopa County, and he, expertly, professionally, and quickly removed people who had actually handcuffed themselves to vehicles and such as that. But those kinds of things, as well as more violent activity. Remember Berkeley. So what I'm talking about really is more violent street clashes, demonstrations and protests, and also physical assaults against those perceived as conservative or pro-Trump, wearing a red ball cap. Never mind if it's the Boston Red Sox, that's not going to save you. Any red cap apparently triggers these little snowflakes. So that sort of thing going on, accompanied, unfortunately, perhaps by arson, the kind of property damage, destruction, and that event disruption that we saw back in 2016. Now, the ability of local law enforcement, I think, to control this violence is going to be severely strained, especially if they're not prepared in advance or don't realize what's coming down the pike here. Now, there's an alliance, as I see it, of hardcore leftist, Antifa, communist, Marxist, anarchists, in coordination with Black Lives Matter, Black separatists like the New Black Panthers, for example, that they are going to act, I think, as the frontline strike force for supporters among the Islamic movement, who, like Representatives Ilhan Omar, Representative Rashida Tlaib in Congress, are never going to be engaged in arson or property destruction on the street. No, but their rhetoric, their language, clearly will be in support of those who do, as well as outright communists within the Democratic Party, as Trevor Loudon has spoken to this group many times. The Democratic Socialists of America, in fact, are communists. More than Trevor's got the numbers on the tip of his tongue, but well over 100 anyway, within overall Congress, meaning House and Senate, who are members of the Democratic Socialists of America. And they will not hesitate to make common cause at public events, I think, conferences, panels, and even at demonstrations themselves. Understand that the Islamic movement and its vanguard in the United States, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, called for revolution in America quite some time back. There was a conference, a MAS ICNA conference, MAS, Muslim American Society, ICNA, Islamic Circle of North America conference, in late December of 2015, if I'm remembering the date right, at which a speaker got up to the podium and literally called for revolution in America, claiming that if the rest of the world, like North Africa, Egypt, could have that revolution, as she said, over there, then why can't we have that revolution here? Those were her words. That was a call for revolution. It was a call for jihad. So it's not just the communists, but you can see how they find common cause here. Her name was Khalila Sabra, and also at that same conference, up to the microphone, came Nihad Awad. Nihad Awad is the executive director of CARE, which is actually Hamas doing business as CARE in the United States, and he got up to the microphone and expressed common cause with Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement. So you see the coalescing of forces from the Islamic movement, Muslim Brotherhood, and the left, and the communists, the Marxists. Now, I just finished reading a very important paper, and I would recommend it to all of you. I was telling Dick and Mary just a bit before we came on to the webinar here. It is called Re-Remembering the Misremembered Left, the Left's Strategy and Tactics to Transform America. It's written by Steve Coughlin and Rich Higgins, names I'm sure you'll recognize, in February of this year, earlier this year, February 2019. And you can find this paper at their website, which is unconstrainedanalytics.org. Now, that paper helped to inform me to a great extent about some of the things I'm telling you here tonight. As the point that they make, understand that the hard left, that is the forces of the hard left plus the Islamic movement forces, operate by way of various splinters, as Steve calls them, or lines of operation, if you will. And each one of these has its own mission to accomplish. So the violent splinter, that would be Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, Taliban, Boko Haram, are less active right now at this moment in the United States because, as I just said, the nonviolent operations are going so swimmingly well. They don't want to disrupt that, even though, as I just said, you know, extremists, actual extremists in this case, nevertheless will continue to try to conduct terror activities, attacks against America. Now, where the violent jihad terror attacks do occur, and here's a point that Steve and Rich make very clearly, where they do occur and can be labeled extremist, radical, that affords space behind them for the so-called moderates or the reformers or even the Muslim Brotherhood, which can get up there and say, no, you know, we don't do that. We don't blow stuff up. We don't shoot people. We don't kill people. Because by contrast, then, they seem so much more reasonable, right? Now, the violent splinter acts in support of the nonviolent lines of effort. Intimidation in tandem with threats of violence intended to drive the population into the open, ready, willing arms of the moderates, so-called moderates. Now, sometimes those threats of violence will be followed by actual application of violence in a punishment-reward kind of strategy. So that also can happen. Now, currently, the nonviolent or the political warfare supportive of the jihad Sharia mission, but by way of penetration, infiltration, co-option from within, is hugely effective right here in the United States right now. The interfaith dialogue movement, unfortunately, has been enormously and continues to be enormously damaging. The failure of the Trump administration for all the good it's done, and it's done a great deal of good. But I would call out its failure to recognize or even to begin to reverse the damage of what we call the Great Purge, the removal of all accurate language teaching and training about Islam, jihad, and Sharia that began in the George W. Bush administration, right, soon after 9/11, but really found its culmination in the Obama years. Now, among those non-violent supporters of the left, of the communist Marxist line of effort, you've got such as the Southern Poverty Law Center, you've got the George Soros Open Society and all of its affiliates, and they are acting as surrogates for the violent groups. You have to understand how this all fits together, and Steve and Rich's paper just really lays it out very, very well. Now, information already out publicly, online, indicators from social media, from various websites. That information indicates that these these street groups, the Antifa and associated groups, already are gearing up for 2020. I think their objective is to overwhelm law enforcement, to provoke the police, the local law enforcement forces to overreact, thus, in their view, hoping to cause anarchy and chaos in the street, to be captured, of course, and magnified by here's another support structure, the leftist media, and other nonviolent support groups. Now, the ultimate objective, I think, is the collapse of the system, the entire system, the collapse of law and order in this country, the collapse of American civil society, which they think, the hard left, the anarchists, the Antifa, they think it's going to provide them the chaos out of which they intend or think that they can seize power. Or at the very least, they think that they can deprive the existing constitutional order of the ability to function normally. Of course, recall the violent disruptions along the Trump campaign from 2016. During that year, I think that 2020 will be 2016 on steroids. There's another reference that I might leave you with from online, another document. It was written by an Al-Qaeda operative. It's only online as far as I know, never published in any kind of hard copy, but online you can find it in PDF format, Management of Savagery, Management of Savagery. And that paper, that document, lays out much of what I just explained to you. That, of course, from the Al-Qaeda perspective, the violent Islamic movement perspective. But again, the same idea, by causing enough chaos in the streets, in a country, in a place, they think they can seize the initiative and grab power on the other end of it. This is also reminiscent, of course, of Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And also I would mention, people mix this up a lot. I see this on social media all the time. Mixing up what happened back in Europe in the 1930s. And so, as we recall, the Russian Communist Revolution took place in Russia in 1917. And then through the 20s and into the 30s, the communists were rising in power at the same time that elsewhere the Nazis, the fascists, were rising in power too. And so what you had on the streets, particularly of Germany, Italy, and Spain in the 1930s, were street clashes between the black shirts. Black shirts are communists. That's why Antifa wears black. They're communist, they're Marxist, and they mixed it up on the street with the brown shirts. Brown shirts are fascists. They are not communists. Communists are not fascists. Black shirts are not brown shirts. They're different. Got to keep them separate, because if we don't get the ideology right, we're not going to get the countermeasures right either. All right, let me, I must not finish here without talking about the rise of anti-Semitism. And that is not just abroad, certainly in Europe, places like France, where thousands of Jews once more are fleeing, making aliyah to Israel. At least there is an Israel for them to go to now. But the expanding and vicious anti-Semitism here in the United States, where in neighborhoods like Brooklyn, in New York City, on our college campuses and other places, there's an absolute spewing of violent, vicious Jew hatred. And it is not just about policy disagreements with the government of Israel. If you want to criticize the policies of the government of Israel, that is perfectly acceptable. But when it moves over into anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Those are synonymous terms. Don't let the excuse that anti-Semitism only criticizes the government policies of Israel, don't let that excuse blind us to the reality that it's in fact anti-Semitism. even all the way down to the high school campuses, at high schools, on college campuses. You've got the Muslim Student Association, Muslim Brotherhood Front Group, of course, Students for Justice in Palestine, and others leading horrible activities on campus, not just with speakers, horrific anti-Semitic speakers, but also staging events like Apartheid Week and the BDS movement, the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement on campus. That's also, of course, many other places across the country. And now we've got these two Muslim representatives in Congress, Representative Ilhan Omar out of Minnesota, Representative Rashida Tlaib out of Michigan, and they've been permitted by the Democratic leadership in the House of Representatives to associate, even to fundraise for jihadist Muslim Brotherhood front groups like CARE, to spew their doctrinal Jew hatred in every direction with zero discipline coming from the House leadership. And only a couple of courageous colleagues of those two representatives in the House of Representatives. I'll name Representative Lee Zeldin as one of those, Republican out of New York, Long Island, and I'll name Mo Brooks, a courageous representative out of the state of Alabama, who forthrightly condemned both Representatives Tlaib and Omar for their anti-Semitism, and they did it out loud, specifically on the House floor at the microphone. So, applause to both Representative Zeldin and Mo Brooks. All right, let me move to what must we do before, we give you some time for questions here. I don't want to leave you with, just go bang your head on the table or something. So let's start with to combat anti-Semitism. What I would say is, first of all, there's a very excellent article that I might recommend to you. It was written just a couple of days ago. On the 7th of September is the date for the article. It's called How to Combat the Coming Perfect Storm for Anti-Semitism in America. I think if you would like, and you don't remember all the specifics here, Dick and Mary can send a link for this out to you afterwards. It was written by Adam Milstein in the Jerusalem Post, as I said a few days ago, September 7th. And it's an excellent article. I will quote some points from it because I thought it was so good. Number one, he said, Adam Milstein said, accept personal responsibility to speak truth about Islam and about communism. The red-green axis, that is. He didn't say that. That's our term for it. Confront and oppose any expressions of hatred for our constitutional republic, its founding principles, and the Jewish people and Israel whenever and wherever you can. Embrace and support the state of Israel. Israel, the Jewish people's homeland, may not be perfect. None of our homelands is, but it's where our tradition, our republic's tradition, history, heritage, and courage originated from. Jerusalem, Christian, Judeo-Christian roots. And it is dedicated to safeguarding, Israel is dedicated to safeguarding the Jewish people around the world, giving them a place to flee to, that is. Remember, this is Adam Milstein again. Remember, we Americans, or actually this is me, this is what I put together. We Americans are of Athens, of Rome, and of Jerusalem. Athens, the original citizen city-state. Rome, the place of civic administration, none of this perfect. And eventually Jerusalem, where our Judeo-Christian roots began. Adam Milstein, in his article, then encourages American Jews to stand up more resolutely for themselves. And he says also seek allies across American society because Jew hatred never ever stops with just the Jews. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to mention a website that Adam Milstein cited in his article, and again, Mary can send this out for you, but it is www. stopantisemitism.org. Stopantisemitism.org. It monitors Jew hatred, incidents of anti-Semitism on digital and social media in particular. All right, action items in preparing for that storm to come, the Antifa storm, the anarchy to come. Understand that there is nothing we can do to stop that coming anarchy and chaos. It's too far along at this point, but we can prepare for it. We can get ready to defend ourselves against it. We can help others among family and friends and civic groups and faith communities and local elected officials and law enforcement to help them become better aware of what's coming. With your family, be certain to be prepared in terms of a communications plan. You know, the usual things that you would do for, you know, a coming storm season even, with food and water and other supplies like batteries on hand at home. Speak up in these various arenas to warn and also to express support for civil society. Make sure that any young people among your own family, friends, and so forth are not being swept up by the environment they may find themselves in among their own friends or at school or on the street or online on social media. That means stay in touch with these young folks, communicate with them as much as we possibly can. Get out, register to vote, and then of course do vote. Attend whatever candidate events that you can. Be active, be involved online. Promote and support good candidates for office at every level, the local all the way on up to Congress. At the strategic level, though, we really need to begin to think and act strategically. We're not. And when I say we, I mean all the way up to the top levels of the Trump administration. They are not thinking strategically. By understanding the overall composition and the objectives and the intent and the motivation and the capabilities of the red-green axis, I think we can begin to develop an overall strategic plan that includes every level. Again, strategic, operational, and tactical. While preparing for the violence, understand that the main line of effort is and always has been, so far here in America, the non-violent, the subversive, whether of the hard left or the Islamic movement. So thank you for joining us in this webinar tonight. Thanks for listening, your attention, and let me take your questions now.
Let me jump in real quick, Dick, unless you've got something you want to speak to, but everything that Claire gave us in terms of documents, websites, reference material, she has passed that on to Dick and I, and I'm going to actually put that in the posting when I put the video out there. So it'll all be documented quite well with it.
Good, good.
So thank you, Claire, for all of that. That's some great links you've given to us. Do we want to kick into the Q&A now?
Let's go.
All right, let's get going. All right, because we have a lot of them. I've been trying to answer a few of them.
Sure.
Robert is asking, to what extent do you think Saddam was part of the plotting or at least knew something about it, talking about 9/11?
I do not think that Saddam Hussein's Iraq was any part of 9/11 at all. Before I joined the Havlish case, as I said later on, about 2009, others like Ken Timmerman and the legal team had begun as early as 2004. And I didn't mention this, but the first thing they looked at was Iraq and Saddam Hussein, because that's what they were thinking too. And within a very short time, a year, a year and a half or something, no more, they quickly realized, no, Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. Now, in the aftermath of 9/11, yes, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, for example, who came out of the battles of Tora Bora, injured, crossed through Iran, found safe haven and medical help in Iran before moving over into and taking up position in northern Iraq. That was post 9/11, and that's where Abu Musab al-Zarqawi came from. But pre 9/11, no.
Okay. Brenda's asking, do you know why Bush allowed members of the Saudi royal family to leave during 9/11 when all airplanes in the U.S. had been grounded by him?
I was really appalled at this, as many people were. Of course, Robert Mueller was the director of the FBI at that time. He's the one that helped to gather up all of these Saudis, get them onto planes when no other planes were flying, and get them out of the country. I think this goes to the very close, duplicitous relationship between President George W. Bush and then Saudi ambassador to the United States, Prince Bandar bin Sultan. Bandar absolutely recruited President Bush. That's the only word I can say for it.
Wow.
And Bush was just not aware, willing to be aware of that man's duplicity and his involvement, as we now know later, and his government's involvement in 9/11.
Okay, we've got an anonymous asking, please comment on John Bolton's removal from the administration. This does not seem like a good move on Trump's part.
Well, a lot of us are thinking the same thing. You know, he was only in there for a very few months. We thought that his influence during that time, this year, 2019, was a very good one, certainly in terms of the hard-nosed approach to the Iranian regime and its nuclear weapons program, also towards the regime in North Korea, Kim Jong-un. But media reports have it that President Trump and National Security Advisor Bolton were not in agreement on quite a number of things, perhaps including Iran and what should be done next, and also perhaps including how we should handle getting out of Afghanistan. So this is all what I'm gathering from the public media just today, but we're pretty disappointed. Many of us are, and kind of worried about who might come next.
Seems to be a lot of acting positions at the moment in the Trump administration. John's asking, what can be done to enable our government to get up to speed regarding Islam and Sharia? Will writing to our congressman or senator help to achieve that end?
Certainly do it. Certainly try to go to any events they might be holding in the the election cycle coming up. If they hold meet and greets, if they hold rallies, if they hold presentations, if you can, back in their home districts, for example, where you might have a better chance of actually meeting that representative, do it. But we've not been successful up until now in trying to get good, solid information about Islam, Jihad, Sharia, the Muslim Brotherhood, to the administration. Of course, we're still trying, but really, a lot of this is probably going to have to happen in terms of informational awareness at the local level.
We've got another anonymous asking something about a 60 Minutes program a week ago that talked about weaponized radiation techniques on citizens. Know anything about that?
I didn't see that program.
Okay. I will. All right. Doreen is asking, I'd like to know more about the coordination of efforts of the various groups supported by the likes of Soros and Steyer. They have been overwhelming and doing so much to infiltrate and pay some of the gangs that are out there causing the problems. Let's see.
Well, in particular, what we've been seeing, at least reportedly, is Soros organization support, for example, for some of the illegal border crashers trying to make the way across our southern border. Pueblo Sin Frontera, headquartered in Chicago, Illinois, reportedly funded by George Soros, for example, which helped to organize some of those migrant border crashers, caravans coming north, more on the way. So, George Soros is an American citizen, and the way that his organization and those associated with it provide funding is often layered and very difficult to determine exactly where it comes from. But reports have it, of course, that he is funding all manner of
chaos
groups and chaos. Yeah.
Tom Steyer just as complicated, or just
Not
as
so
bad?
familiar with him, I have to say.
Okay. Victoria is wondering if the Trump administration will ever have any awareness that the Muslim Brotherhood in America is bad, and the infiltration of the government, schools, and Congress that they have been doing. Will they be stopped?
You know, the best I can say is that we're going to keep trying. But I also encourage, you know, as we've just said, citizens at the local level, you know, make use of any opportunity you can on the upcoming campaign trails to contact and reach out to your local representatives, or those new and young candidates that might be thinking about jumping into a race somewhere, to feed into the system. You know, young folks who already have perhaps an awareness that some already in office don't.
Okay, Ed is asking, what role did Russia play in developing terrorism, and how important are they today under Putin?
Well, we know from certain defectors, I'll name one in particular, Ion Pacepa. Ion Pacepa was a very senior, high-ranking official in Romanian intelligence who came out to the West some decades ago now. He has spoken widely and written a book, Desinformația. There are others like Yuri Bezmenov. You might find his videos online. I'd highly recommend them. All this is in English. Who have warned and told us about how the Soviet Union in that time, Russia, actively sought to support, not sought to, they did support, such as Yasser Arafat, the PLO, the PFLP, Palestine Liberation Front Group, and others among the Arab jihadis in the Middle East. Actively, KGB trained them, worked with them, funded them, backed them. And in particular, I'll mention this, that I think probably one of the ways that Sunni and Shiite first began to come together was literally under KGB training in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, back in the years, maybe as early as the 60s, certainly by the 70s, and that included there in those training camps, fighters who eventually would be supporters of the Ayatollah Khomeini to overthrow, in 1979, the Shah of Iran. And there, in the Bekaa Valley, under the tutelage of the KGB, they came in contact not just with, you know, all kinds of other, you know, terrorist groups around the world, Red Army and the Baader Meinhof and what have you, but they came in contact with the Muslim Brotherhood. And I think that is where some of the original ties betwixt and among Al-Qaeda, Iran, Hezbollah, Muslim Brotherhood were first established. And the Russians that I just mentioned, look them up because they talk about this.
Edward is asking, what is the difference between fascism, brown shirts, and communism?
Well, in brief, fascism is typically a nationalist expression. It is government control of the means of production, but it doesn't own them outright. There is private industry, but that is dominated by the central government. Communism, obviously, is an international ideology, and under communism, a pure economic communist system, the government outright owns, seizes, and owns and controls all of the means of production in that society, be it industry or agriculture. So I think these are the biggest differences, the nationalist versus internationalist focus, and then the differences in levels of government intrusion and control over the economy. Yes, their tactics can look pretty similar when you see this stuff on the street, but just keep in mind that they are different, they're distinct, and they're separate.
Mitch is asking, do you know how many mosques are tied to Iran from Michigan?
I don't know any kind of a specific number. I know that just as in the rest of the world, Shiite mosques here in the United States or Islamic centers are many, many fewer in number than the Sunni ones. Certainly in and around places with a heavy Shiite population like Dearborn, Detroit, some of the suburbs of Chicago, there will be more Shiite mosques. A couple places you can look this up and find out for yourself. Go online to Islam Finder Online or you can also go to a website called Salatomatic, Salatoma, whatever I see, Salatomatic. And you can choose your radius around a zip code or a city, 5 miles, 10-mile radius, and plug that in, and the website will come up with a list of all the different, and you can split it. You can say, I'm only looking for Sunni mosques, I'm only looking for Shiite mosques, and it will bring that up for you along with specifics like addresses and phone numbers.
Carol is asking what your thoughts were in terms of Trump trying to meet with the Taliban.
Oh, yikes. I could almost not believe when I saw that not only had we been, I mean, we all knew that the administration, especially our military plus the envoy, Zalmay Khalilzad, had been meeting in Doha, Qatar with Taliban representatives, jihadis that were part of 9/11 for many months now. But the news that the president had been about to bring these dirtball jihadis on American soil to Camp David, I almost fell off my chair. I am not glad, obviously, for that car bomb explosion in Kabul that took many Afghan lives and another American serviceman's life. But if that was the reason that Trump called off those meetings, perhaps it was, perhaps it wasn't. In any case, it was a good call to call off those talks, to end those talks. As you've heard Trump say now, the talks are dead. I don't know where things go from now on.
Yeah.
But I think that was I think talks with the Taliban, period, are not only counterproductive, but deeply detrimental to American national security, because it's about surrender talks. It's about how to get 14,000 American troops out of Afghanistan without being massacred. That's what they're about, let's face it. And that means having to go overland primarily, and it means having to go through Pakistan, which is not our friend, another jihad regime. But to think that you're going to come to, some kind of peace arrangement with the Taliban, I think just bespeaks of the failure again to understand anything about this enemy that we've been fighting there for the last 18 plus years.
It was incredible to me as well, and they couldn't even stop any of the bombings during the peace talks.
Not couldn't. That was deliberate. That was on purpose. That was in your face, Kufar.
Yeah.
That's what that was.
Yeah.
But we'll see where we go from now.
Yep. Daniel's asking, is it time for the Jews to become more militia-oriented as we were when the JDL was active under Meir Kahane?
No.
Okay.
I would absolutely say no, absolutely not. I don't think militias of any sort, Jewish or otherwise, is what we need here in the United States right now. What we do need is the support and the education of our local law enforcement units, be they police or be they sheriff's departments, so that they are equipped with the knowledge and the understanding, the willpower and the authority to do what they need to do to keep law and order and protect all of us, all citizens, Jewish and everybody else.
We've got just a couple left. Brenda's asking, what are your thoughts about the Ahmadiyas? Are they wolves in sheep's clothing?
No. The Ahmadiyas are a very minor sect of Islam. As such, they are mostly reviled and condemned by mainstream authoritative Orthodox Islam. The Ahmadiyas profess to denounce, to reject jihad. Of course, that's apostasy under Islam, so are they even Muslim? But for that rejection of violence and jihad, according to Orthodox authoritative Islam of the scholars throughout the centuries and down to the present time, that is heresy, that is apostasy. But if they try to use venues to try to convince those who might not be so well informed that, oh, this is what Islam really is. It's about the kind of, it's our Islam. It's the kind of Islam we practice. Well, not so much. Minor, heretic, apostates.
One last question. Does the rate of growth of Islam in Canada concern you?
Same or worse than here. Of course, up in Canada right now, they've got a prime minister, Justin Trudeau, who has been blindly, hugely detrimentally for the people of Canada, welcoming not only of such as returned jihadis from the battlefields of the Middle East, fighting with the Islamic State, but also very open about bringing in refugees and immigrants from places that are terror prone, that the governments do not have control of the sovereign territory of those countries, like, let's say, a former Syria, and also embracing in Canada of the Muslim Brotherhood and its front groups there, which overlap. I mean, they're the same front groups as we have here, CARE, ISNA, etc. Only up there, they've got Justin Trudeau, and we've got Donald Trump.
So, question for me then, what are your thoughts on our northern border? As dangerous as our southern border because of Canada and
not yet,
with Trudeau?
Not yet, but certainly we need to be vigilant about that northern border.
Yeah.
We've been such, good neighbors and good friends with Canada, and remain so to this day, that we don't even think about that border as a place from which threat could come.
Right.
In the same way that we think of our southern border, which is getting overrun, by illegal border crashers.
Right.
Not at all the same thing. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the way that Prime Minister Trudeau has been welcoming immigrants, Muslim immigrants from places where they cannot be vetted properly, the backgrounds cannot be checked, security is out the window, and then returning back, allowing jihadis who had fought with the Islamic State to go back. Yes, we need to be more thoughtful and vigilant about that northern border too.
Any thoughts on how well Trudeau is doing in this election season for him?
Well, it's hard to tell necessarily from down here south of the border. He's got challengers, Bernier, and others. But how it's actually going to turn out, anybody's guess, at least from what I can tell at the moment. He's got the power of the incumbency at the moment.
All right, that's, let's see, one new one popped in, but I think we're okay. Yep. Let's go ahead and close it out, Dick, and thank Claire for all that she's done for us tonight.
Well, I want to say Claire is certainly a massive asset that we appreciate. I want to also
wealth of information.
Compliment our questioners. I would say that's a
very good question.
Very good set of questions demonstrating an awareness that is encouraging. So we appreciate the audience, the one team. We're on the team with Claire, and I think the group of our attendees is a great compliment to that. Claire, hang with us just a few more minutes. We're going to go through a couple of action items that we've added and kind of invite you to review yours, and then we're going to do some administrative stuff. I'd say we got another 8 to 10 minutes for our audience to hang with us, if you would. All right. Well, one action item we would like to recommend is for each one of us to decide in our own mind, given what you've heard tonight, what your life will be like in January of 2021 if Donald Trump is not the president. We just like people in this period of preparation to think about the impact on your family, on your church, your synagogue, and your organization. You may have a pro-life organization or some other kind of organization. Just give that some thought and see how that motivates you to prepare for the 2020 fight. Decide also what obligation you have to prepare for the 2020 fight. An example of that would be to think through what responsibility you have to support the outcome of the election in a state other than your own, if that state is a must-win state. We're going to talk more and more about that over the seminar program. Take a place like Florida. Just something to think about. Other action items that we'll invite Claire to comment on and add to I think Claire made a great case about being bold in our words, in not compromising, speaking out, and drawing contrasts, frankly, between good and evil. There are people that think this is World War III. There are people that think this is a spiritual war, and that people should behave accordingly. I'll just go over these briefly, Claire, and if you want to add to, feel free to jump in. Claire mentioned about not forgetting about our young people, how important it is to stop and counter the indoctrination that they're getting. It will be unconscionable for someone who has the information that Claire and others give us to not register. So, get people registered. Okay, you're going to have holidays coming up. At the end of our 11-week period, you're going to sit down for a great holiday season for 6 weeks with family. It's time to tighten up the belt and get confident enough to engage in conversations. You may have to disagree with grandma or your mother-in-law, but it's important to prepare. And then there have been conversations about active shooter training. If you're concerned about what might be a year of unrest next year, perhaps your organization can request your local law enforcement to provide active shooter training. It's something they have available, but this is part of getting to know your local law enforcement. So they know you, they know your concerns, and if it is going to be a local activity, you know someone that knows you if there needs to be an enforcement of the law. Claire, do you have any other comments on the action items?
No, thank you. I mean, after the set that I offered and this, I think this is pretty complete.
Well, all of your action items will be, I'm pretty much sure, printed out in the post that Mary does for us. So we really can't thank you enough. That is a extraordinary amount of information. With the background you have and the credentials you have, it's even more meaningful. And we want our audience to just embrace that. Of course, the whole podcast will be posted. Use that and that information to spread the news about who Clare Lopez is, what she uses for her sources, and what her messages are. So, Claire, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it very, very much.
Thanks to you, Dick, and Mary, and everyone who was on the webinar tonight. Really appreciate your taking the time out to watch this and be with us.
Okay, so what's coming up? Well, let's talk about something. We have a new news. Some of you may know that we're going to have an unplanned but emergency webinar tomorrow night. This is caused because a physical event in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan at a evangelical church was canceled. It was a 2-day event with Sharam Hadian and Jim Simpson. They had been invited for months to be present in Bloomfield Hills Baptist Church to speak. Sharam was going to speak about the interfaith movement, how it's sabotaging America and the church. Super important topic. And Jim Simpson was following the next night with how Islam is destroying America from within. He's looking at political Islam. Flyers, security, a whole bunch of stuff was prepared. And unfortunately, the event was canceled. Like other events have been canceled. This is a little bit about what Claire's talking about in terms of incrementing the tension in America. The meeting was canceled because of media attention from, we'll just say, leftist Marxist politicians in the area. And of course, CARE was very, very active in condemning the organization, even though the event. So the events were canceled. We responded by scheduling an emergency webinar tomorrow night. You're already registered because you're on tonight. You're welcome to come back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern. Jim Simpson and Sharam will highlight the presentations that they were going to make in person that the Red-Green Alliance did not want Michiganders to hear. Well, you'll all from all over the country and Canada be able to hear what is it about those presentations that was so inappropriate from the viewpoint of the Red-Green axis. And frankly, this is a big deal for Jim and Sharam to be canceled the night, 2 days before their event. They're going to give their own assessments of free speech in Michigan. And it'd be a very candid conversation tomorrow night. We invite you to join us for that. You're already registered. Just push the button. You will get a link, a reminder. We've got 10 more to go in this season, and I want to go over them with you. Next week, we will have Sharam already scheduled on another topic. Next week is Constitution Day. Sharam will be giving us, with his background as an ex-Muslim and a Christian pastor, Islam's assault on Christianity. The next week, Alex Newman will join us and talk about rescuing our children as a means to saving our freedoms. He's going to talk about the education system and the indoctrination of our children. We'll continue with Elizabeth Sabadich-Wolf on October 1st. She is a Western European from Austria. She's going to be talking on the topic of Muslims' rights to not be offended have now taken precedence over freedom to speak. She knows precisely because of her indictment in the European Court. It's one of the European organizations, and her simply telling the truth has brought her to international attention, because some Muslims were offended, and in their jurisprudence system over there, her case was decided against her. She's going to talk about this problem for us in America. The next week, Trevor Loudon will be back. Always grateful to have Trevor join us. He's going to inform us about how the Marxists and socialists are mobilizing millions of voters against Trump. He's going to talk about groups that you may not have heard of. Some of those groups are associated with the country of China that are involved in impacting our election next year. And we will have on October 15th and the 22nd, our co-founder, David Boris, will be speaking about Sharia in the public schools on the 15th, and then Sharia in the colleges and universities. This is a very important topic. There will be webinars in addition to this, and we'll tell you about them as we get closer. Okay, well, we're almost done, but let's remember there is a radio show associated with United West and Sharia Crime Stoppers. What are we going to do this week? September 13th, that's a Friday. Global Patriot Radio is where you go. You can certainly go to the United West Sharia Crime Stopper page to find out about how to access that, or just Google Global Patriot Radio. That night, we will do a rebroadcast highlighting two very, very, very brave people. They're brave enough to stand against Sharia, Pastor Don McKay being one of them. Pastor Don is an evangelical pastor, and of course, Rabbi John Houseman. The two of them made a very important conversation with us, and we want to rebroadcast that. Incidentally, it is the Evangelical Church in Bloomfield Hills that you're going to hear about tomorrow night. That is the location where Don McKay is always brave enough to stand against Sharia. More about that tomorrow. News. September 20th, we'll start a new chapter in the Global Patriot Radio shows associated with Sharia crime and the United West, and that will be because we have a new host. Mary and I are going to be concentrating on special projects related to the 2020 fight. We will be here every Tuesday night for the webinars, but our friend Andrew Herod is going to take over the role of leading the radio programs. He is a Jihad Watch contributor. That would be Robert Spencer, Christine Douglas Williams, those kind of people. Andrew is in great company and adds significantly to that organization, Jihad Watch. He's a fellow of the Middle Eastern Forum Campus Watch, and he's a very prolific writer. So please mark your calendar. Starting on the 20th, Andrew will be carrying the banner for what we've started. We are Sharia Crime Stoppers. We're part of the United West. We really appreciate your attention. We are one team. We're focusing on a particular fight. It's 2020. Hopefully the 2020 fight will be an election, a constitutional election. We're going to use the word fight just to make the point to be determined, all the things that we talked about tonight. We are part of the United West. These webinars come to you through that activity. If you like what we do and you want to contribute to the United West, feel free to do that at theunitedwest.org. Mary, any closing comments?
No, we're just happy to be back, and we've gotten such really nice comments from our attendees tonight that are so appreciative of us and what we're doing. So thank you, everybody, for those kind comments, and many kind comments about what you presented tonight as well, Claire. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, well, we'll see you again next Tuesday night with Sharam Hadian. I'm sorry, tomorrow night we will dial back. It is dynamic world here.
It's been a busy day.
Busy day. We have happy to be able to put together, in reaction to the cancellation, a national webinar. The entire country can watch what a few hundred people are going to get to watch in Bloomfield tomorrow night and Thursday night. You'll get to watch it from your couch. Those of you in Michigan, it's very, very unfortunate it was canceled, but you will also get to watch, along with your friends from all the states in America, what was it that got that meeting tomorrow night, Sharam, and Jim Simpson's presentation on Thursday night canceled? Exactly what is it that the Muslim Brotherhood and the Democratic Socialists of America do not want you to know? So tune in tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern. So with that, we'll say good night. Good night, Claire. Good night, Mary.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.